Hello, everyone. So welcome to the EDI session. So before getting into questions, I'm going to everyone on the panel is going to briefly introduce themselves. So I'm Lena. I'm the EDI lead for the ECM committee. And so I'll pass on to Howard.
Thank you very much. My name is Howard Haughton. I'm a member of council and the EDI chair for the IMA.
Okay, hello. So I'm Snezana Lawrence. I was the EDI chair for some years, and now I'm not, but I'm still supporting Howard very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Sara Lombardo and I have been a former member of IMA Council. I am a member of the IMA EDI team and I am stepping in for Matthew that unfortunately couldn't be here, so I've just learned about it very recently. But I'm very pleased to be here, in fact, to support the IMA, but also because I lead the EDI work stream for the Academy. And I do work in the EDI space with the LMS and the RSS and the EPSRC, so very pleased to join in.
Okay, so I'm going to throw over to audience questions in a moment, but before doing that, just to, I guess, set the stage, I was just going to ask each of you what ID means to you. I mean, we have a definition, but it can mean very personal things as well as a larger scope. So I just wondered what it means to you and why you think it matters both to you personally and, I guess, to maths as a field.
So the question is, what does EDI mean?
What is EDI to you?
Okay. So for me, EDI means equity, diversity, and inclusivity. Did you hear me stress the word equity rather than equality? Because we're kind of not there as yet. Quite often when we speak about equality in this country, we speak about equality of opportunities or meritocracy. I think we are all aware that equality of opportunities and meritocracies are things that are idealistic, but not necessarily real. And so we have to meet people where they are. And when we meet people where they are, we speak about actually equality of outcomes. And if you're still with me, we speak about equity rather than equality. So equality is where we want to get to, but today we need to sort of meet people where they are. And hence, I speak about equity, diversity, and inclusivity rather than equality. Now, beyond that definitional point, and I think definitions are important because when individuals join organizations, they may have a misperception as to what EDI means or DEI or any other permutations of those letters. For me, it's really important to understand not so much that we are talking about, let's say, protected characteristics, but we are talking about just simply respecting each other as human beings. And so diversity of thought is paramount, but diversity of thought is a function of who you identify as. So it's important to understand that. So for me, from my perspective, it's really about understanding how we can better communicate with each other, how we can respect each other's identities, and how we can better work together as mathematical sciences. So that's what EDI means to me.
Thank you. I think this is fine. Okay, so I'll just tell a little bit about how I got into this. So I was asked to be a diversity champion, so that was the role, which I took in 2019, I think. And then pandemic hit, and the role expanded humongously. So I actually asked Roz and others to start a committee rather than do it all myself, because I didn't have either the expertise or the understanding of all the issues that have actually come up since then. So we established this committee, which originally was called DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion. And so, although I agree with Howard about equity, that was the call of, that was the name of that committee. So for me, diversity, equality, and inclusion is a little bit different, and I probably stand more for that than for EDI, and I'll tell you why. Because I think there is more opportunities to do something that we can all do to make access available. Whereas if equity sort of, for me, means that we have to actually make things on behalf of someone, and I worry about that. So there's more space for error there. So that's my sort of view of it. But diversity, I think, is incredibly important in all aspects, obviously, of life. And what I was thinking about, what to say about this is, I thought about really asking you to telling you that for me, DEI stands about not making assumptions. You see something in front of you, or a person or an institution, and but you always have to make some assumptions, right? And the assumptions that we make is that mathematicians by nature should be quite humble people, very hardworking, and with very many virtues. And I think some of those virtues necessarily will be part of the IMA. And so we can, I've been thinking about it a lot. But that is in very basic and short terms what it means to me.
Okay, so rather than thinking about the definitions, I will give you my very personal take on this. So I agree with Howard. For me, E is equity, but reflecting on my personal journey from someone who has been now 25 years in the UK, but is clearly not. I wasn't born here. I am come from Italy, so I have a completely different background. EDI is connected with listening, discovering, and belonging. I studied physics, and I soon discovered in Italy, in Rome, and I soon discovered that I wanted to be a mathematician instead. But I also traveled through countries, so I was an Erasmus student for a period in Germany and then in the UK, and I discovered that that what we call inclusion, equity, or equality and diversity, they vary very much with the country you are in. They interlace with the culture and what if you like, the challenges that you can experience in one country are very, very different from the one that you would experience in another. So in this sense, I tend to see being part of the EDI community as a continuous exercise of listening, discovering the other people, the other point of views, which sometimes collide with my initial standpoint. But it is through that dialogue, it is through try to put ourselves in the shoes of others and try to really see why inadvertently we might exclude people, and mathematics can be very exclusive. And I would say, I would dare to say, in this country particularly, because of traditions sometimes, etc. And we shouldn't shy away to recognize that there is an element of exclusion in mathematics unless we really address it. So I find that there is not a right or wrong, but that we have to, especially when it comes to thematics of EDI. Of course, there are right or wrong, don't get me wrong on it, but there is also space for dialogue, space for understanding when there are tensions, why we are feeling that. Ultimately, unless we embrace diversity, and I think we heard this morning as well, we won't succeed, because it's by including a diversity of voices also in our mathematical modeling or in our studies, in our application of mathematics, that we will be stronger and successful.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm now going to go over to the audience if anyone has any questions.
Ignore this.
I'm just going to check if we can get this mic. Is it that one? Okay. I'm just going to...
I was going to start easy. I'm going to go up a tougher notch. I know it can be directed. You can start off with this first one, yeah? And the others can think about it, right?
Okay.
Here we go. Here we go. In a world that is becoming much more polarized, look at the news outlets, it's becoming more polarized, yes? And there's quite a number of EDI initiatives and offices around society being closed down. How are you going to ensure that EDI will be here, part of the IMA journey in 10 years' time?
Excellent question, thank you. So I think, and I want to answer this in a maybe a slightly non-traditional way, which is to say that for me, when we've achieved EDI status, because for me, EDI is a transition, it's a journey that we're on. Once we get there, we no longer need to talk about EDI. In other words, there's no need for you and I to talk about EDI, because if there's no need for us to talk about EDI, then we've actually got to the place where we're quite happy, all of us, from our disjoint and disparate, either protected characteristics or whatever it may be, we're happy to coexist as we are. So towards that end, over the next 10 years, it really just has to be a measure of setting targets. And by targets, I mean, it's almost like you have a vision and mission statement and you say, this is where I see myself in 5 to 10 years. So we'd had this discussion earlier about having a vision. Mathematicians need to have a vision. Mathematicians need to have a strategy. The reality is we need to have that also for EDI. And so towards that journey, perennial journey that we're on, we have to then sort of map out what is the 5-year journey, the 10-year journey, etc. For those that are interested in looking at the EDI strategy, I'm not sure if it's on the website as yet, there is a EDI strategy. And that EDI strategy will evolve, and hopefully it will go beyond where it is today, and it will be, hopefully in 10 years, there will be no need for it because of the reason that I just mentioned to you, which is that there's no need to talk about it as opposed to the desire to talk about EDI.
Okay, so I think it's really important to remember what diversity is. So we need to maintain diversity not only in terms of gender, race, cultural background, and all of that, but diversity of opinion. So I think what the clash is coming about is the inability of the sort of extremes to agree upon certain values and virtues, as it may be, and the people sort of keep forgetting that all you need to really do is agree to disagree. And I think if we can sort of put that forward as a sort of overarching virtue of diversity, there's a little bit of a branding sort of exercise here needed. You know, the diversity means I think this, you think that. It doesn't matter. We are friends. I think that really is an important sort of part of that work for me, anyway.
Yes, so facilitating the debate and the discussion, but also being, accountable and show that as the IMA that matters. So it is fundamental that we do address the challenges, we try to remove the obstacles, and that we do so in constantly discussing where we are, whether our initiatives are open, accessible, everything we do to check it against the metrics of our own strategy and what we want to see the IMA achieving.
Can I just say that respect, I mean, speaking to Snezana's point, respect is key. So if you fail to respect somebody, it really doesn't matter whether you and they share the same protected characteristics or not. You're not necessarily going to agree with them. Worse still, if you don't share the same protected characteristics, the chances for tension and friction between the two different individuals could actually increase. So respect is really key. Having that level of respect for diversity of discourse, which I say is and that discourse is really a function of your identity. So having that level of respect is really important.
I think there's someone
This way first.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about inclusion, and this may seem an odd question when we get to it, but I chair the college in Newham, and I find in many science and maths events I go to, they assume that I must have misspoken and it's Newnham, rather than actually accepting that there are people in East London that want to do education. So I hope there's no one here that would fall into that. Oh, one or two will. We have 2,500 16 to 19-year-olds. 75% of them will not have maths and English at GCSE. In many cases, that will be the maths that they don't have. And yet we then force them to retake those GCSEs. And I mean, Hannah said earlier, we get people to do maths until they fail. Well, we make them fail again and again. So when it comes to inclusion, many of these will be from poorer backgrounds or will be from an ethnic minority background as well in Newham. Is it time that the IMA actually was more bold in saying, let's drop the compulsory side of this and try and improve our brand by encouraging people to do maths rather than forcing them to fail and fail again?
So I think inclusion is also important as well. And as Sara had mentioned earlier, when she spoke about inclusion, she mentioned the word belonging. So people have to feel as if they belong. One way to make them feel as if they belong is not to put those barriers in front of them. In some instances, to set them up to fail. So for me, inclusion has to include all different possible pathways in order to enable somebody to feel as if they belong. And if that means changing the discourse, changing the way in which we recognize success or achievement, then we need to do that in order to ensure that when we cast our net, we get as many fish coming into our haul as possible, for sure.
Okay, so I was a teacher for a very long time, actually, before going into higher education. So it's a very tough kind of choice because you actually want to have people who know that basics are to maths. You know, the bottom line, grade C is very, very sort of basic mathematics. So it's a very tough choice because it's not really in the interest of the children not to know that amount of mathematics. This is the trouble that I've had. So really, basically, I just learned how to motivate the students better. And I learned, used a lot of history mathematics. So a lot of narratives and that sense of belonging through the diversity of the history of mathematics plays a great role. And actually, I have a colleague here who does the same, Joanna. It makes a lot of difference when the children can see mathematics in context of their own kind of personal or cultural history and see the contributions of various nations or ethnic groups or languages and so on. So I think that kind of thing, I'd go for that. I wouldn't drop GCSE, I'm sorry.
Yes, I tend to agree with what Snezana just said. I find this obviously an overlap with education. And again, thinking of my own personal background, I would question how we teach mathematics. Are we doing the right thing? Are we teaching so that those students, every student, can succeed? Or we are inadvertently, again, putting barriers which deprives those students from an opportunities, but deprives us all as a society. So I would more look into that challenge rather than, the other, if you like. So we should teach mathematics in such a way that is accessible, and it shouldn't be linked to where you grow up or what is your social background. I think there is a lot more to do in that sense. Unfortunately, I don't have, an easy solution to offer, but I feel that that's where we should look at.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly say thanks myself before moving on, because I think what you've all said is right. These skills are relatively basic and are invaluable regardless of what you go on to do. I think it's something we kind of have to decide that if if we are putting that value on these skills, which I think all of us are, that we need to make it easier to, rather than kind of just giving the exam again, or it's a different exam, but just kind of repeating the process, you have to acknowledge that something in that first teaching phase did not get through to these students. So just making them go through the same cycle again and again, you're probably going to get progressively worse results. So then you need to change, I mean, the method leading up to the first exam. But if for some reason those students didn't respond to still a very inclusive and diverse curriculum before that, maybe these people need a very tailored education for them. So I think it's something that we tackle both ways.
Hi, thank you. Hi, David Schley from Sense About Science. I'd be interested to have your views on the Social Mobility Foundation's call today for socioeconomic characteristics to be captured alongside data on sex, ethnicity, sexuality, and so forth. Because I think often those metrics, sometimes those metrics are considered as proxies, and the reality is for organisations, I think, is that we're not seeing that. I see nodding, so I don't think I need to say more to response, apart from possibly the question, is this something IMA will consider?
So I think maybe Sara and I were nodding in unison there. Yeah, for sure. I think there are lots of proxies if you were to try and remove, give you a simple example. If you apply for a loan at a financial institution, there are various, things that you would fill in on an application form, some of which would capture protected characteristics and others would not. And even if you removed the protected characteristics, you still have proxies. You still have proxies on there that, for example, where you live, the postcode and different things like that, which could narrow down to within a relatively small degree of tolerance what the ethnicity is of that particular individual. So what I'm saying is, even if you had, and I believe you should have, socioeconomic class, for example, as a intersecting factor in looking at equalities and equities in general, because simply, if you are from a poor or working class background and you're black, and you're from a rich background and you're black, you're treated differently. You're still black. I woke up black this morning, irrespective of how much money that I could earn. And class will make a difference to the sort of networks that I can move in and the different circles that I can move in, for sure. So I think that we need to incorporate more non-protected characteristics which are relevant. So socioeconomic status, I think, is definitely one of those that should be used as well, for sure.
Sorry, I'm not 100% sure of the question. Could you sort of simplify?
Well, the suggestion that as well as organisations recording sex, ethnicity, sexuality, they will record socioeconomic class. So basically capturing that you're employing, you're inclusive, you're employing a diverse representation of society. So for example, a simple example is you may have an employer who's saying, look, we have lots of black employees, or a university saying we have lots of black students, but if they're actually, fee-paying students from overseas, they're not actually representing society and community. So,
yes,
for example.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. I think that actually, for example, I was talking over lunch with a colleague about, for example, pilots. So I teach pilots risk, and pilots are predominantly very well-off white boys going into aviation. And that is just purely for the fact that they have to spare £100,000 for their pilot training plus everything else. So yes, that would be very beneficial, but how you organize that, I don't know. But yes, I think that would be a good thing to do. Yeah.
So I'm really pleased with your questions because, Howard and I have been discussing this over, months. There is a challenge which is a challenge for everyone, and that I'm trying to address with the RSS and colleagues, and, in statistics, etc. How do we capture data, diversity data, in a way that is that allow us to benchmark ourselves to compare with the population, this is really still a problem. And I think there are many voices and many suggestions, but we are well placed as a mathematical scientist to possibly move. And I know that, as I said, other learned societies are thinking about that, precisely to capture diversity data in a much richer manner, so including socioeconomic status. So my hope would be that, for example, the academy could contribute to that, so that the IMA, the LMS, the RSS could join forces and establish one way of collecting diversity data, so that we can then compare and contrast and see, are we improving for all the diversity characteristics in that broader sense. So that if anyone has suggestions, please let me know, because it's a challenge.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Stephen. I've been doing schools liaison. I should point out I'm also on the EDI committee. I'm from a poor socioeconomic background. So for 25 years, I've been doing schools liaison, where I go to schools and colleges in Northwest, and I've been to over 100 schools. And I've Naira, if 25 years ago you'd have said to me, will things be better in 25 years? I'm afraid the answer is no. In fact, they are now worse than they were 25 years ago. I'll just give you an example. So a few months back, we were working with the University of Manchester, MMU, and Salford University. We sent out, I'm sure you've all heard of Levelling Up Maths, where we use our undergraduates to tutor A-level students. So we reached out to 50 schools and colleges in Greater Manchester, because they all teach A-level, and we had 20 responses, which is frightening. That means 60% of schools and colleges aren't engaging at all. And as I say tonight, I don't think things have improved. I think things have got worse. I'm sure you've all read in the Maths Today magazine that universities are closing maths departments, and these are predominantly universities, which are ex-polytechnics. So if anything, it's becoming more polarised, because the students who are getting 4 A stars at A-level are going to university to do maths, and the ones who are getting C's and D's are not getting a look in. So I'm just wondering, what can the IMA do to address these problems?
Excellent question, Steve. It kind of maybe circles back to the point that gentleman made earlier. I think there are different ways in which you can learn mathematics, and I think the traditional way of doing GCSEs, doing A-levels, for me, does not work. So I think you need to kind of think a little differently about how people learn. A few years ago, nobody was talking about neurodiversity, yet today we are talking about different ways in which people learn. And I think if we understand that, then we should also understand that there are different ways of teaching mathematics, there are different ways in which people learn mathematics to I would say, an acceptable level, which is not necessarily equivalent to them having to SWOT, memorize, and then pass an examination, but that they can actually apply, and they've got it in their DNA, they understand how it works. So I think that way of teaching and learning mathematics is completely different than the traditional way in which we've just been taught to learn almost by rote, how to memorize things and pass an exam. So the opportunities are vast, Steve. I think that we do have the possibility of making changes, and I think we do have the possibilities of seeing those changes in the next 10 years. We use 10 years because Naira likes 10 years sort of into the future. So in 10 years' time, I think we can, if we change the modus operandi, maybe even if you think about sort of, baccalaureate system that they have in Europe, which is slightly different to what we have over here, I think you'll see differences in improvements and attainment rates over what we have today. So maybe that's an alternative that we could also think about as well.
Thank you. Yes, I agree actually with Steve, because, for example, my university is shut in the maths department. So, and my university is very sort of polytechnic, and it served sort of its local populace. So yes, I mean, it's very difficult because universities are independent entities. You can't really, to be realistic, what can we do? We can promote, and there are initiatives like the Pure Maths Initiative and so on, but universities pretty much can do what they like, I'm afraid. And because they depend on the fees of the students, there is nothing in that respect we can do. So perhaps, encourage students to consider other options. Informal education is sort of actually now very well serving students, but they don't get anything out of it. But speaking with young people, they're quite happy to learn that way if that gives them a job in a good, for example, in government or good company. So apprenticeships, I think, are probably going to become more important because there are so many resources that the children, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, who can't afford, for example, to go to certain places, but they can access these free resources and then through apprenticeship can get recognition. I think eventually that will be more important. But at the moment, I think that is not taking off in a big way, but we'll see.
Without repeating, and in interest of the discussion, I think the IMA can be radical. So we can say mathematics doesn't need to be difficult. Mathematics has this, the fact that it's difficult and accessible for the brightest, etc. But at the level that we have been discussing, at the level of a baccalaureate, etc., that doesn't need to be the case. It doesn't need, it can be made much more accessible. And again, I don't feel entitled to talk. There are many that works in education here. So it's a conversation probably to be had together with them, joining forces. But I think there is a lot that the IMA can do to challenge this idea of again, something only for a part of the population, whereas having the curiosity, having an inquiring mind, having a critical attitude, asking questions, probably it is the characteristic that we do use for most of our time, even in research. So I also find, and again, apologies for being somehow, coming from with a different angle, I really don't find the distinction between pure and applied at all fitting. Mathematics is a unity. I know that many share, possibly all of you, this idea. So we can challenge that perception that is out in the population. So mathematics is fun, and mathematics is accessible. You have to be interested. If you are interested, doesn't matter, what is your background, you can do and study maths. So I think that would be a step.
I just want. I'm going to quickly say something and then because I just wanted. Yeah, I just wanted to say I fully agree. I was born in 2000 in quite a poor town, and so through each stage of education, you could see the degradation and just the kind of window of opportunity narrowing to, can I make it to this next stage? I mean, there's a 5-year age gap between me and my sister, but I have 80 grand's worth of debt. She has 10. So even just on things like that. But I think there's no one fix, but I think over the past 10 years, we've seen quite a wide diversification of the ways you can teach, the amount of online materials that can show the more enjoyable side of maths outside of what people said about just learning things and just having to memorize equations. I think it's just a lot of the time these resources are not maybe utilized by people who are interested and have sought it out, but it's not making that translation to classrooms. And I don't think that's teachers' fault. They are massively under-equipped and are doing the best they can. But I think we need to, the IMA does a good job of hosting events, and I think that's a really good way of trying to, I guess, get students to search this stuff out for themselves. But on a societal level, I think we need to get that sort of education in every classroom.
One here, and those will be the last questions. Yeah, okay, so.
I'm Anjulika Salhan, and My question is slightly different to what everyone has been discussing. So I'm probably starting from a positive note that as a society and as a group of mathematicians, we have moved quite a lot. The fact here that we are so many female mathematicians are here as fellows and even as our president. So we should acknowledge that we have moved quite a lot. However, still acknowledging that there are lots of problems. So keeping the hat of a mathematician, what are the top 5 problems that we would like to tackle and how are we going to tackle?
Yeah.
Sorry, top 5 problems in the mathematical sciences or from an EDI perspective? Okay, thanks. It will always be the case for me until we get that equality that we have to get through equity and inclusion. So these are perennial problems, and I see these problems as being problems tomorrow and in the next few years. When we are there, we will know we are there. But I think we're not there as yet. So whilst we are striving towards getting to equality, and whilst I acknowledge the fact that we have a female president and we have other things, we are still no better, and I go back to Steve's point actually, than where we were 20 odd years ago in aggregate. So having said that then, we still need to keep the momentum going. We still need to make people aware of the fact that EDI adds value to organizations, every type of organization, including UK PLC, the government, and make it very clear that there is a value and a pound and a pence can be associated with more inclusivity, diversity, and, what did you say, equality or equity?
Okay. I think it's education actually, very much, so for example, working with secondary age kids, and I was working even with the primary and on sort of various master classes, and then undergraduates and teacher I did teacher training as well. Certain groups value mathematics more because it is more common to their narrative of their either cultural history or their family history. And I think through education, if we can sort of achieve that anyone can see the beauty and the value of mathematics, I think that, so for me, it's education.
I don't know if I have 5, but certainly challenging the perception of mathematics starting from the primary. And in fact, challenging stereotypes that do affect negatively inclusion and diversity from the primary would be certainly one of the key challenges that I see. Of course, there are, in the mathematical sciences, we know very well where the so-called pipeline leaks. So the step from undergraduate to postgraduate is a moment where we lose female, for example, but diversity in general. And then further on, obviously we are trying to see what are the data there for mathematical sciences in industry, etc. But for example, for the university, we know where we lose diversity, and there are some key challenges that we could address. Ultimately, it is a cultural issue. So going back to universities, they have been designed on a model that was for the white male, typically. So obviously, while we are on the journey and a lot of positive changes have been made, we are within the society. So we do reflect the similar challenges that we see in our society. So I think there is a lot of work to do, but I think it's everyone's responsibility to contribute and continue this trajectory.
While you live in a national physical laboratory, I studied mathematics abroad, and I don't know British curriculum, but I think all children, they lack some kind of context and story around mathematics. Somehow history of mathematics is detached from mathematical education, in my opinion. So if children knew, for instance, why Gauss or Brunelleschi were solving particular problems, why they were looking at particular engineering tasks and challenges, and why some ideas appeared like integral. If children looked at the original manuscript of Newton with the Principia, they would understand this infinitesimal ideas, how there was idea first appearing of derivative. So it is completely different context and different understanding of mathematical ideas. Sometimes I see that this wonderful journal of IMA shows Mathematics Today, shows very interesting stories around mathematics. So my question is, can IMA contribute to development of curriculum with some maybe textbooks or maybe support materials that would put major mathematical ideas into historical context, how they were developed and why some particular idea appeared and how it was motivated. That is the story to tell children. Then they would be interested. Once they're interested, they will go and dig library. You don't need to motivate and convince them, go and study because you need good grades. They would go and study because they will be excited. And this is something that we can blend together, as they say in previous session, that where is the culture? Culture should be together with education. You cannot separate it like this and feed people with some abstract Bourbaki-like ideas that are very dry and not interesting even for 20 years old, not to mention 10 years old. So my question is, can IMA contribute to curriculum development in a more kind of educational and cultural way?
Thank you. I know a group at Queen Mary, for example, have done a lot of work in making educational materials about queer mathematicians, both past and present, talking about, I guess, their biographies, but also the mathematical work they've contributed and how both of those things intersect, and they've done a lot of work of kind of trying to get that into schools. And I think you're right that so much of a lot of people's, the moment that maths loses them is often the point of where they no longer see the reason for it. They don't see the reason as to why they're learning SOHCAHTOA. They just see a triangle, and they have no context for what this can be used for outside of very physical circumstances. So I think diversifying that and including the history would make a lot of difference.
Yeah, very much agree with what you just said, Lena. And also your question, excellent points. Culture is important, and it kind of goes back maybe to what I mentioned earlier, which is there are different ways of teaching and hence different ways of people learning mathematics. For example, maybe a little contentious, but I mean, if you think about the sort of curriculum within schools or curriculum within universities, there are ways in which you can make it more relevant, culturally relevant, to individuals. There was a piece that I wrote a while back, can't remember how long it was, in Maths Today, actually talking about forget the title, but it had a lot to do with looking at sort of integration and how that could be used euphemistically in order to bring people together. But then I made reference to, Pythagoras' theorem and the origin of that not being with Pythagoras, but being elsewhere. When we teach the history, the question is from whose perspective? And we have to get that language and we have to get the perspective correct. So quite often, if you go to school in the UK, you will have a very jaundiced view about what a mathematician is. And that person doesn't look like me. However, if you dig a bit deeper, if you care to dig a bit deeper, you may find lots of mathematicians actually who did look like me. Now, why is that? Rhetorical question. Point is that we can and we have the power to change the way in which we teach mathematics, to make it more culturally relevant and to make it more accessible and to tell a story. You're perfectly correct about dry mathematics, but if you make a story out of mathematics and you link that to history, then that will perhaps resonate with those individuals more because they'll remember the story, but also they'll make the connection between the story. Maybe they'll have an imagery in their mind about what that person looked like, and possibly also be able to think about how they could apply that mathematics as well. So I think all of these things are intertwined, but your question is exceptionally good. Thank you very much.
Okay, so, okay. Shall I answer or finish?
We're very behind
Okay,
schedule.
okay. I'll
So
talk
is
to you
it
later.
okay if we wrap up there, and then we've got a very similar discussion, I think, in the next 2 sessions and a fireside chat. Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you so much.